Hello, welcome to the Daily Bellringer. Please don't forget to take a look at the questions down in the description. Today we're going to be taking a look at the War of 1812 and the burning of Washington. All right, the War of 1812, sometimes considered to be the forgotten war in American history, especially this event of Washington being burned seems to be forgotten. So let's take a look and see what happened here. So in June of 1812, the Americans declare war on the British. But of course, the British were far too occupied with Napoleon at the time to really come over and begin to fight the Americans. And so in the meantime, America actually tries to invade Canada, where the British had colonies set up. And they actually get to York, the colonial capital, and burn York in April of 1813. And so when the British do arrive in force here in America, they're kind of taking revenge for what happened at York. But in the meantime, also, in 1813, there were some British warships that began to arrive under the command of this guy named Admiral George Cockburn. And Cockburn begins to basically terrorize the Chesapeake Bay area, the area near Washington, D.C., basically just burning small settlements around there. But in April of 1814, Napoleon is defeated over in Europe. And so now the British can really focus attention on sending troops over to America. And so by August 19th of 1814, 4,500 British troops under the command of this guy named General Robert Ross arrive at Benedict, Maryland, and they unload their boats and they begin to march towards Washington, D.C. And so the next day, August 20th, a scouting party led by future President James Monroe spot the British approaching, heading towards Washington, D.C. And so the British begin to have, small skirmishes with American troops, where the Americans are trying to slow their march down. And by August 24th, the British reach the outskirts of Washington, D.C., and there the Americans are going to put up a stand to try to stop them from getting into Washington at a place known as Bladensburg, Maryland. So about 6,000 American troops are dug in. They have artillery, they have cavalry. It looks like they should be able to win because there's only 4,500 British troops who have just marched, close to over 20 miles in the August heat of the Chesapeake Bay area. They're, having heat stroke. They're weak from this march. You would think it should be an easy victory for the Americans, but instead it's one of the biggest military blunders in American history. Within minutes, the Americans begin to retreat from this battle. It becomes known as the Bladensburg Races, as the British basically just push right through the Americans. Remember, the British had just come over from fighting Napoleon and the French, who were some of the best troops in the world, and facing the Americans wasn't really much of a match for them. And so the British just march right through them at Bladensburg. So now nothing stands between the British and the capital. Now, President James Madison had ridden out to see the battle. And when he sees that the British are coming right through, he sends word back to Washington, D.C. to evacuate. Especially he sends word to his wife, Dolley Madison, who's still there in the White House, saying, you have to get out. Also, as all this is going on, we have to get all of our important documents out. The Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, all of these treaties that had been approved are basically put into saddlebags and ridden out into the countryside to make sure the British don't get their hands on them. Dolley Madison, she stays in the White House until the very last minute, insisting that they get the painting of George Washington down, the painting that still is in the White House today. She gets this painting down and basically gets out of the city right as the British are coming in. So she basically risks her life to save this painting. The British arrive in the city at nightfall on August 24th. And as night is falling, they go into the Capitol building, which now is basically deserted. They hold a mock session of Congress, and they vote unanimously to burn the building. So they pile all the chairs up in the two chambers of the House and the Senate, and they set it on fire. Then they proceed down Pennsylvania Avenue down to what is then known as the President's House or the White House. They break in and they find that the table has been set with food and drink and everything, and so they kind of have a little party in there. They steal stuff, souvenirs. In fact, one of the things they take is James Madison's love letters to Dolley, and they set the building on fire then. All right, and they could see, people from around could say they could see the blazes for miles around. You could see the glow of the city as these buildings are burning. So that night, the British camped there on Capitol Hill near the burning Capitol building. The next morning, they set fire to the Navy Yard and to the Library of Congress. But 2 o'clock in the afternoon, something really strange happens. A hurricane blows in, or at least they believe it was a hurricane. This hurricane comes in. The rain begins to put out the fires, but then not only that, a tornado comes down right in the middle of the British. And there's reports that, cannons were lifted and thrown, dozens of yards away, and that, trees are being knocked down. And actually, the storm inflicts more casualties on the British than they had experienced at the Battle of Bladensburg the day before. And so the British actually retreat from the city after the storm comes in. The storm rages for about 2 hours and literally pushes them out of Washington, D.C. And so the storm actually saves the city, you could say. The British withdraw, and they never set foot in Washington, D.C. again. 3 days later, James Madison and the residents of Washington come back into the city, find the burned out shells of all these buildings. James Madison holds a cabinet meeting in the post office, which is the only government building that's still standing. James and Dolley Madison will never live in the White House again. It won't be rebuilt until James Monroe becomes president. All right, so hopefully you learned something there, and thanks for watching.